I stepped out of the car and into the soft hush of cobblestone, my heels barely making a sound. My sister Diana's wedding rehearsal dinner was being held at Lumar's, the kind of French restaurant where a salad cost more than my grocery budget used to. But tonight I wasn't thinking about the price of lettuce. I was thinking about the way my parents had insisted I be there. Not invited. Insisted. "Of course you're coming," my mother had said through gritted teeth over the phone. "It wouldn't look right if you didn't. People talk." That was the theme of our family. Appearances above all else. Not connection, not care, just perception. I wasn't part of the celebration. I was a prop for their perfect tableau, and tonight I was supposed to play my part. Quiet, modest, forgettable. I walked into the restaurant alone, wrapped in a simple black dress. No one offered to walk with me. No one had waited outside. Diana had arrived earlier with a full entourage, her future in-laws, bridesmaids, and of course our parents. I was the only one who showed up without fanfare. The host stood near the entrance, posture formal, eyes scanning the list on his leather-bound reservation book. I saw it happen in an instant. His glance flicked upward, caught my face, and something changed. A flicker of recognition. Respect, maybe. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone, replaced by a smooth smile. "Good evening," Diana said with a tight grin, stepping forward in a champagne-colored gown that shimmered with every movement. "Walker party of 4. The host nodded, but his eyes drifted back to me. "Right this way." We followed him through the elegant dining room, chandeliers casting golden light on crystal glasses and velvet chairs. I walked behind my family, not quite part of them. They moved with performative grace, making sure their designer watches caught the light, their laughter just loud enough for neighboring tables to notice. Diana turned to glance at me, eyes skating over my dress. "I see you didn't bring anyone," she said. "I wasn't aware it was required," I replied softly. "Well," she said, giving a one-shouldered shrug, "it's just, this is a celebration, Sarah. It might have been nice to bring someone who... Never mind." She smiled sweetly, as if she'd just offered me a compliment instead of a dismissal. Mom gave her a subtle nudge, but her own gaze didn't hide the discomfort. We reached our table, near the center of the room, not the best one, but prominent. As we sat, I noticed the staff again. Their eyes flicked toward me. Some whispered to each other, then straightened. "Can you even afford to eat here?" Diana asked as she unfolded her napkin. Before I could answer, a waiter approached. Jean-Luc. His eyes lit up the moment he saw me. "Welcome back, Miss Walker," he said, voice gentle but clear. "Your usual table was reserved for a private party, but I hope this one will suffice." Diana froze mid-smirk. My father coughed. My mother looked like someone had just dropped a glass of red wine on her blouse. "I think it'll be just fine, Jean-Luc," I said, offering a small smile. He nodded. "And your usual vintage?" "That would be perfect." There was a stretch of silence so thick it could have muffled a string quartet. Jean-Luc turned to the others politely. "Would anyone else care for something to drink?" Diana blinked. "Wait, your usual table? Your usual wine? Do you come here often?" "Not really," I said, "just when I'm in town checking in on things." "Checking in?" she repeated, confused. Before I could respond, the sommelier arrived with a 1982 Bordeaux. He handled it like a sacred object, presenting it to me for approval. I nodded. He poured, just a taste, and I sipped. "Excellent," I said. "Please let the chef know I'm looking forward to his tasting menu." My father's jaw clenched. That bottle was older than Diana's fiancé and worth more than his car. "Sarah," my mother said slowly, "what is going on?" I set my glass down gently. "Oh, I guess I never mentioned I bought Lumar's about 6 months ago, along with the rest of the restaurant group." Diana let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. "What? You live in that shoebox apartment and shop at regular stores?" "I choose to," I said, "because I value things other than appearances." Jean-Luc returned with the amuse-bouche. It wasn't even on the menu yet. A testing course, the kind of thing a chef only prepared when he wanted my opinion. My father looked at his plate, then back at me. "You own this place?" he asked, almost in disbelief. "I own this entire chain," I said. "Lumars, La Mion in Paris, the new location in London." Diana's mouth opened again, but no words came. I leaned back in my chair. Let the courses come. Let the evening unfold. I had no intention of making a scene. I was just here for dinner. The evening unfolded in a slow crescendo. The next course came with the sound of delicate porcelain meeting the table, Chef Michel's signature foie gras, carefully presented with a perfect garnish of fig and balsamic reduction. Jean-Luc served it with practiced elegance, his smile as composed as ever, as if he hadn't just detonated a social bomb earlier. I leaned forward, savoring the crisp aroma of the wine, watching my family attempt to regain their composure. Mom's fingers were still tightly clutching her wineglass, as if she could wring meaning out of the fine Bordeaux. Dad was slowly pushing his plate around, pretending to examine the dish with far too much focus. Diana had retreated into her phone, no doubt furiously Googling Lumars's ownership, the restaurant chain I'd just casually mentioned owning. The silence stretching into something more uncomfortable with every passing second. Jean-Luc's departure didn't help. His presence had been the only thing tying us together. Now I felt like I was drifting, floating just beyond the reach of their grasping expectations. "Sarah," my father finally said, breaking the silence, his voice tight. "You never told us about this. Why didn't you say something?" He looked up at me, his face pale, as if this sudden revelation had left him breathless. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was thinking about it, but because there was no answer to give. What could I say? That I had chosen a different path than the one they had mapped out for me? That the money they never believed in had made me more than they ever thought I could be? I decided not to answer at all, allowing the question to hang in the air. Diana, still trying to salvage her sense of superiority, finally looked up from her phone, her fingers tapping the screen nervously. She set it down, as if deciding that it was now more socially acceptable to join the conversation. Her gaze met mine. Flinty, calculating. She had always hated how easily I could ignore her. That has always been the power I wielded, my ability to stay calm in the face of their judgment, to remain untouched by their trivial expectations. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice sweet with a touch of disbelief. "Did you really buy all of this?" She waved her hand vaguely at the glistening chandeliers, the gold-leafed walls, and the array of crystal glasses on the table. "Did I really buy this?" I repeated, and I let my voice drop, just for effect. "Yes, every bit of it." I sipped my wine, enjoying the moment. "And more." Diana's face fell. It wasn't the fall of realization, but more the deflation of ego. This wasn't a surprise. This was an annihilation of the image she had so carefully built in her mind, an image where I was just a lesser version of her, where my lack of refinement was the reason she had to remind me, again and again, that she was the golden child. Well, tonight, I was the one wearing the crown. Before she could respond, I turned my attention to my father, whose face was now turning a shade of purple. "I always wanted to ask," I said, watching his discomfort grow with every word. "Do you remember that MBA program you told me I should skip? The one you said I was wasting my time on?" His eyes flickered. "Of course I do," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "I told you it was pointless. You would have been better off following me into the family business." "You mean the investment firm you practically begged me to join, even though it was never my passion?" "Yes, I remember," I said, a touch of bitterness creeping into my voice. "I'm glad I didn't listen. I had other ideas." "Other ideas," Diana snorted. "Like this restaurant nonsense?" The scorn in her voice was unmistakable. I didn't flinch. Instead, I offered her a cool smile and said, "You can mock what you don't understand. But let me tell you something, Diana. I didn't have the luxury of riding on the coattails of someone else's success, like you did with Dad's connections." That shut her up. Her smug expression faltered as she struggled to find a retort. What Diana doesn't understand, I continued, my voice growing calmer, is that there's no prestige in buying your way to the top. You have to build something from nothing, fight for it, invest in people, not just in appearances. I took a deep breath. That's why I've created something real, something that lasts. The words landed with the precision of a perfectly timed punch. There was a moment of awkward silence. Then the next course arrived, a light tuna tartare, accompanied by a delicate truffle vinaigrette. Jean-Luc returned just in time to place it on the table and quickly made his exit. He didn't linger, but I could see the slight tilt of his head as he moved toward the kitchen, like he was taking note of how the atmosphere had shifted. Dad's eyes narrowed. "How exactly do you think this is going to play out?" His voice was strained, but his gaze was sharp now. There was a little less condescension and a little more wariness. "You think we're just going to forget about all those years where you were, how should I say this, making poor choices?" I raised an eyebrow. "Poor choices?" I repeated. "Like choosing integrity over vanity, or like deciding that my future wouldn't be determined by the social circle you surrounded yourself with?" He looked taken aback. "Dad," I said softly, but with purpose, "when I was starting this restaurant, I didn't have your connections. I didn't have the bank loans you always managed to get. I didn't have the luxury of falling into the next high-paying job with just a smile and a handshake. I had to earn everything." "Everything?" Dad scoffed. "What about—" "Oh," I said, cutting him off, "the money I inherited from Grandma Walker? The money I used to buy Lumars? I reinvested it into the company. I didn't use it for a second house or a flashy car like some people." I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. "And by the way, I've paid my staff twice the salary you think is appropriate." There it was. The truth they never wanted to face. My mother shifted uncomfortably, running her fingers along the rim of her wine glass. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. "Please don't," I said. "There's nothing more you can say that I haven't already heard. I'm not interested in your approval. I don't need it." Diana's phone buzzed again, her expression twitching as she checked the screen. She looked up, eyes wide. "Oh my God," she muttered, as she discreetly typed something into her phone. I could guess the contents. It was one of her socialite friends, texting to ask about the real owner of Lumars. I couldn't help but smile, letting the victory roll over me in waves. The more they tried to diminish what I had built, the stronger it made me feel. And for the first time, I could feel the tables shifting. Dinner continued, but it was no longer about the food. It was about the message that sometimes the best revenge isn't in a dramatic confrontation or a speech. Sometimes it's just letting people realize in the middle of their sneers and judgments that they were wrong all along, that they've been looking at you like you were invisible while you were building an empire they never even saw coming. By the time the main course arrived, an intricate mix of seared duck breast paired with wild mushrooms and a delicate truffle sauce, the atmosphere at our table had shifted. It wasn't the usual lively chatter of my family members laughing, gossiping, and checking their phones every few minutes. No, tonight was different. The room felt heavier, like the air itself was weighed down by all the unspoken words floating around. I noticed Jean-Luc's eyes flicker over to our table as he refilled our glasses. There was something almost imperceptible about the way he smiled at me, a look that said, "I know who you are." It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding between the two of us. And in that moment, I realized how much this entire evening was about reclaiming what had always been mine, but had been so quietly dismissed. My family had underestimated me for far too long. "So, Sarah," Dad said finally, breaking the silence, "how exactly did you go about, acquiring all of this?" He waved his hand at the restaurant, the chandeliers, the delicate arrangements of food, as if it all existed in some faraway, inaccessible world. His voice carried a hint of disbelief, as though he still couldn't comprehend the reality of the situation. I put my fork down slowly, allowing the question to linger before I answered. "It wasn't easy," I said, letting the words hang between us. "But I made it happen." You know, the MBA you said was a waste of money? Turns out it was actually a pretty solid foundation for this. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, his gaze fell to his plate, as though he could avoid this conversation by focusing on his food. But I wasn't finished. "Do you know, Dad," I continued, watching his discomfort grow, "that I didn't use family money to start any of this?" His eyes shot up at that, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "In fact, I didn't use anyone's help. Not yours, not anyone's. I built this from the ground up, piece by piece. The restaurant group, the staff, the concept itself." "Piece by piece?" Diana repeated, her voice almost a sneer. "Come on, Sarah. You always like to pretend like this was all you're doing, but we both know the real story. You didn't get here alone. There were investors, backers, all those connections you think you didn't need." I smiled, a quiet satisfaction filling me as I heard her dismiss the work I'd put in to build what I had. But I didn't let her words affect me. Instead, I leaned back slightly, my eyes glancing down at the fine dining plate in front of me. "Sure, Diana, there were investors, but I made the right decisions. I put in the work, I led the negotiations, built the relationships, handled the logistics. Those connections? Well, they're mine now." I looked up at her, the edge of my smile softening. "I just didn't need to flaunt them like some people." Her expression faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear with the practiced grace of someone who was used to spinning a story that didn't always fit. "Diana, dear," Mom said, her voice pitched a little too high as if trying to fill the uncomfortable space. "Let's not start comparing. We're here to celebrate your father's birthday." Dad's jaw clenched, his discomfort now palpable. "So, this restaurant empire," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "It's all self-made?" "Everything," I said, leaning forward slightly. "From nothing." Diana shifted in her seat, her eyes darting around, clearly uncomfortable. She picked up her wine glass and took a long sip, but I could see the wheels turning behind her glossy exterior. She wasn't used to being dismissed, not like this. It wasn't the typical, celebratory dinner conversation she had planned, and I could see it in the way her fingers curled around her glass, as though she was trying to maintain control of something that was slipping away. "Well," Dad said finally, his voice quiet, almost defeated, "I suppose I should be proud of you then, Sarah." For a second, I almost believed him. It wasn't much, but it was something. But that was all it was, an attempt to make peace. The acknowledgement didn't change the truth. The truth was that for years, they had dismissed me, they had discounted my potential, and left me to figure everything out on my own. And now, here we were, at a table in a restaurant I had purchased, in a life they never imagined I could build. "It's a long road," I said softly, setting my glass down, "but the thing is, I didn't build it for anyone else. Not for you, not for anyone in this room. I built it for me. And that," I continued, my eyes slowly scanning the table, meeting each of their gazes, "is something I don't need anyone's approval for." The silence that followed was thick. The tension was heavy, almost suffocating, and for the first time all night, the family members around me were no longer the ones calling the shots. But there was one more thing I had to make clear. "Oh, and by the way," I said, breaking the silence with the same casual tone, "I don't need to ask for permission to enjoy my success either." Jean-Luc reappeared at just the right moment, a knowing smile on his face. He was holding the next bottle of wine, a rich, velvety Bordeaux. "Shall I pour the wine, Miss Walker?" he asked, the subtext clear. This wasn't just about serving wine. It was about a shared history, one he and I understood better than anyone at the table. "Please," I replied, a quiet satisfaction curling in my chest. As he poured, I turned back to my family, whose discomfort was now palpable. My mother, who had always been so sure of her position, was suddenly unsure of how to navigate this new dynamic. Diana was silently seething, and Dad was deep in thought. He had always believed in appearances, in wealth, in status, but what I had was something they couldn't buy. It was built on years of hard work, persistence, and vision, things they had never truly understood. Jean-Luc returned with the next course, and for the first time tonight, my family fell into a stunned silence, trying to reconcile the person they thought I was with the woman who now sat before them. The silence stretched, and I knew it was only a matter of time before their masks began to crack. The dessert cart arrived with the same quiet grace that Jean-Luc had shown all night, gliding through the space like a part of the restaurant's intricate choreography. It was covered with a white linen cloth, the kind that looked out of place in the world I'd grown up in. Too clean, too perfect. The cart was full of delicate French pastries plated with precision, a mountain of chocolate soufflé, delicate crème brûlée, and an assortment of fruit tarts that practically shimmered under the candlelight. But I wasn't interested in the food. Not really. At that moment, the restaurant wasn't about the luxury, it wasn't about the indulgence, it wasn't even about the celebration. It was about power. My power. The power I had quietly reclaimed in this room, with my family sitting across from me, now fully aware of just who they were dismissing all these years. Dad's face was pale as he stared at the dessert cart, but I could see him doing the math, trying to calculate the costs, assessing the worth of every bite, the price of the experience unfolding in front of him. Diana was unusually quiet, her phone resting forgotten on the table. Even Mom, who had spent the entire evening managing her composure, seemed lost in thought. Jean-Luc set the soufflé in front of me, lifting the lid with a flourish. "A favorite of yours, Miss Walker," he said, his voice low, careful. "Indeed," I replied, holding his gaze for a moment. The silence in the room stretched. For a second, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I picked up my spoon and gently broke the soufflé's delicate top, the steam rising in a perfect swirl. I could feel their eyes on me, every one of them waiting, wondering what I was going to say next. But I wasn't going to rush this. Not yet. "Well," Dad said eventually, his voice a little tight, "I'm still trying to understand. How did you go from working at a restaurant to this?" He gestured vaguely at the restaurant, at the entire scene. "What made you believe in yourself enough to buy it?" I took a long sip of my wine before responding, letting the tension linger in the air. "It wasn't about believing in myself," I said slowly, tasting each word, savoring the weight they carried. "It was about recognizing that this was where I was meant to be. I spent years working at places like this, watching people like you think they had everything under control. I realized that there was a whole world here that nobody really understood, the kind of world where you don't get a seat just because you show up. You get a seat because you've built something people can't ignore." Dad shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. Diana sat up straighter, suddenly more interested in the wine glass she was holding. Her carefully constructed composure was beginning to unravel. "So, you just bought a restaurant?" Diana said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "With what? Your millions?" Her laugh was hollow. "You must have some pretty good connections." I didn't flinch. "Connections are important," I said, "but what's more important is knowing how to use them. You see, Diana, I wasn't born into this world. I didn't inherit anything. But I figured out how to make my own place in it, and that's something you can't buy." The words hit her like a slap, but she didn't say anything more. She just stared down at her dessert, swirling her spoon through the crème brûlée, as if she was trying to find some answer in the caramelized sugar. Jean-Luc returned, bringing a second bottle of wine with him. This one was even more expensive than the last, though I didn't need to look at the label to know. The slight hesitation in his step, the way he took care to pour it just right, told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just doing his job, he was making a statement. He knew who I was, and I knew he knew. "Miss Walker," he said, his voice low again, but full of respect. "The new menu for London, it's nearly finalized. Will you be coming by to approve the last details?" I smiled, my eyes briefly catching Dad's. "Of course. I'll be in London next week. I'll have everything finalized before the team starts marketing the location." "Marketing," Dad repeated, looking at me like I had just spoken in a foreign language. "But Sarah, you're running all of this?" Every part of it, I said, from London to Paris to New York, and every other city in between. I could feel the weight of their disbelief, my parents, my sister. The disconnect between the woman they thought I was and the one standing before them was wide and deep. But they weren't ready to acknowledge it yet, not openly. It wasn't until Jean-Luc turned to Dad and, with a small but meaningful nod, acknowledged him with a quiet, "Mr. Walker, the wine for the Paris location is almost sold out. It seems our clients are quite fond of your daughter's selections." I saw Dad's face freeze for a moment. The recognition that this wasn't just a fluke hit him. I had done it. I had built something real, something that, while they were still circling around it in confusion, was becoming undeniable. I didn't need their approval. Not anymore. I shifted my focus back to my dessert, cutting into the soufflé, letting the moment settle between us. I wasn't rushing them. I wasn't forcing them to see me. I was just going to sit there, quietly, and let them process the truth. Jean-Luc cleared his throat softly, almost as if he was aware of the tension in the air. He set the dessert cart aside and paused, looking from one of us to the next. "Is there anything else, Miss Walker?" he asked. I leaned back, enjoying the silence, letting it linger just a moment longer. "No, Jean-Luc," I said, my voice calm but firm. "That will be all." And just like that, the tension broke, not with anger or defiance, but with the simple, quiet truth of who I was, and that, for me, was enough. The wine arrived, and Jean-Luc's presence at the table was nothing short of ceremonial. As he poured the 1982 Bordeaux, his eyes met mine for the briefest of seconds, a shared understanding between us that my family had no idea about. It wasn't just the wine that commanded attention. It was the subtle acknowledgement of the unspoken power that surrounded this moment. I could see the tremor in my father's hand as he lifted his glass, his discomfort with the price more obvious than he would have liked. "Miss Walker, your usual choice. A perfect one, as always," Jean-Luc said, his voice smooth, as if he were saying it to a regular guest at a private club, not someone who had been dismissed by her own family for years. I didn't respond directly, but the corner of my mouth curled up in the slightest smile. My family still hadn't realized the depth of the mistake they had made. I could feel the tension building, the unease settling in their bones as the facts started to sink in, facts they had spent years ignoring. It wasn't about the wine or the meal, it was the power in the air, the power I now wielded in silence. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the complex flavors coat my tongue, relishing in the satisfaction of knowing that I had built everything they had tried to tear down. "It's perfect," I said quietly, my voice firm but calm, the words sinking in like a stone dropped in still water. Dad cleared his throat, his voice strained. "How exactly did this happen?" His tone was sharp, the question less about genuine curiosity and more about the discomfort he was feeling. My father, the man who had dismissed my restaurant aspirations, now wanted to know how it had come to this. I allowed the silence to stretch, just long enough for the weight of his question to linger in the air. I enjoyed the pause, savoring the moment before answering. "You remember that MBA program you refused to fund? The one you said would never amount to anything because I focused on restaurant management instead of finance? Turns out that program didn't define me. What defined me was understanding how to build something from the ground up, something sustainable, a market for a revolutionized dining experience." There it was. I let the words hang in the air, letting the sharpness of the truth sink into the room. Dad's face paled, and Diana stopped fiddling with her phone for the first time in the evening. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to process this new reality. This wasn't just about one restaurant, this was about an empire. "The company I founded now owns 32 restaurants across 3 continents, I continued, my voice steady, my hands still, even as my family shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Le Cirque in New York, La Mione in Paris, and that quaint little place in London where you celebrated your anniversary last year, the one you could never get reservations for." The silence in the room was palpable now. Diana looked like she had swallowed a bitter pill, her phone now useless in her hands as she typed furiously. Dad, too, was staring at his water glass like it had the answers to every question he had asked himself over the years. How did this happen? He asked again, but this time the arrogance had left his voice, replaced with a genuine bewilderment. I leaned back in my chair and finished my wine. The answer is simple, really. I made it happen. I didn't sit around waiting for someone to tell me I was worth something. I built something of my own, something that mattered. The words rang true, not just in the room, but for me. I had made this world, the one they were trying to pretend didn't exist, happen, and now they were sitting in it, unable to ignore the truth any longer. Jean-Luc returned with the next course, an impeccably prepared dish of seared scallops that I hadn't even seen on the regular menu. "Chef Michel has prepared a special creation for you," he said, his eyes gleaming with the same respect he had given me all these years. "She'd love your opinion before it's added to the permanent menu." "Of course," I said with a smile, motioning for him to serve it. I could feel my family watching me, processing the weight of what was unfolding. The tension between us was palpable, but I wasn't about to let it dissolve quickly. I had earned this moment, earned their discomfort. As the scallops were placed before me, I took in the moment. Chef Michel was showing off tonight, and I didn't mind one bit. The taste was exquisite, the flavors perfectly balanced, and I couldn't help but enjoy the irony. Here I was, in the center of this high-end restaurant that I owned, and all they could do was watch, unsure how to react to the reality they had been so quick to dismiss. "My company's restaurant group now has a foothold in London," I casually added, as if the mention of the new location didn't matter at all. "Next month, we're opening another location in Tokyo. I've already secured investors, and we're booked solid for the first 3 months." The discomfort at the table was almost visible now. Diana was visibly sweating, her phone lighting up with what I assumed were messages from her society friends, realizing that they were in the presence of someone far more powerful than they had imagined. "I'm sure you know all about our London trip," I continued, almost lazily. "You know, the one you couldn't afford to join us on last year." Diana's face turned a shade of crimson, her usual bravado faltering. Mom, on the other hand, was struggling to regain control of the conversation. "So, what are you planning next?" she asked, her voice soft but laden with the undertone of worry. "Next?" I repeated, savoring the irony. "Next, we scale. London is just the beginning. I'm already eyeing expansions in Paris and Berlin. We're already planning for our next phase, one that puts us ahead of our competition." Mom leaned in, trying to grasp the concept, and then blurted, "But why haven't you told us this before? We've been so worried about you living so modestly." I stared at her for a long moment, considering my words. "Because, Mom, success isn't about showing off. It's about building something real, something meaningful. I don't need to flaunt wealth just to prove I've succeeded." There was a pause. I could see my father processing the truth, the weight of his years of dismissing me now sitting heavy on his shoulders. Jean-Luc returned once more with the next course, a delicate dessert. I raised my glass and smiled sweetly at my family. "Happy birthday, Dad. Dinner's on me tonight," I said, a quiet satisfaction flooding over me as I made the words land. "Consider it a thank you for every meal you've had in my restaurants over the past year." I hadn't realized how much of my life had been shaped by their blindness until this moment. They were still picking at their entrees as if doing so would buy them time to figure out how the daughter they pitied had just pulled the rug out from under them. I watched Diana swirl her fork through the scallops, pretending to listen while texting under the table. She always thought multitasking gave her an edge. It never had. My mother tried to recover first. "Well," she said with a tight smile, "you've certainly done well for yourself." The pause before "done well" said everything. It wasn't praise, it was a recalibration. I nodded once. "I've built something I'm proud of. That's all I ever wanted." Diana scoffed lightly. "Is that why you live in that apartment like a college student? Why you never wear anything new?" There it was, the default fallback. If they couldn't dismiss my success, they'd question my choices. "I live where I'm comfortable," I said, "and I wear what I like. Unlike some people, I don't need to advertise my worth." My father finally spoke, and his voice was low, like someone forcing calm in the middle of a storm. "You should have told us." I set my wine glass down gently. "I did, Dad. Over the years. In different ways. You just weren't listening." The silence after that was heavier than the one before. Even the background hum of the restaurant, soft jazz, clinking glass, seemed to fade. I hadn't raised my voice, but the words landed like thunder. And then came the line I didn't expect. "You were always too sensitive," he muttered, reaching for his water. I blinked. "Sensitive?" I repeated. "You took everything personally," he added, as if that explained the years of neglect, the subtle digs, the refusal to believe I could build something valuable on my own. "You could have asked for help. We thought you were just getting by." "You mean you assumed I was failing?" No one answered. I continued, my voice quiet but even. "I didn't need help. I needed belief. There's a difference." Mom looked down. Diana opened her mouth, then closed it again. The only person who didn't flinch was Jean-Luc, who arrived just then with a warm smile and a delicate dish of raspberry millefeuille. "Compliments of Chef Michel," he said, a preview of the new spring tasting menu. "Please thank her," I replied, and as he walked away, Diana leaned in. "Sarah, why did you never tell me? We could have done something together, a collaboration. You know, I have my events firm now." The sudden pivot from scorn to interest was laughable. "You mean the firm that books overpriced rooftop venues for trust fund weddings?" I asked gently. Her smile froze. I didn't need to insult her. That wasn't my goal. But I wasn't going to pretend she'd ever shown the slightest interest in working with me before tonight. The idea that I'd help her climb my ladder now that she knew I had one? That was rich. Still, I offered her an olive branch. "Diana, I'm not looking for revenge. I just wanted dinner." Her eyes narrowed. "But this was calculated." "Only in the way it happened," I said. "Not in why it happened." And that was the truth. I hadn't planned this confrontation. I hadn't orchestrated it like some soap opera finale. I'd accepted their invitation out of obligation, not anticipation. I didn't expect them to recognize the dining room layout I'd redesigned or the custom tableware I'd commissioned. I didn't expect them to notice the subtle changes in the menu or the improved service structure. But I did expect them to keep dismissing me, right up until they couldn't anymore. "You bought this place," Dad finally said. "Outright?" "6 months ago." "With what?" he asked, half skeptical, half shaken. "With profits," I said plainly. "I bootstrapped the first 3 locations, grew smart, partnered with the right chefs, streamlined operations, minimized waste, reinvested every dollar. And unlike your firm, Dad, I don't take on unnecessary risk." It stung him, I could tell, but I didn't say it to humiliate him. I said it because I needed him to understand. I wasn't the reckless dreamer they'd always assumed. I had vision, and I had discipline. They just never looked close enough to see it. Diana crossed her arms. "Why didn't you ever show us this side of you?" "I always have," I said. "You just never bothered to look past the price tag." The waitstaff returned, clearing plates, and my father gave me a look I hadn't seen since I was 12, the look of a man who didn't know what to say when his assumptions crumbled. "We really didn't know," Mom said quietly. "It's hard to believe you built all this." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. "Believe it or not, Mom," I said, "that says more about you than it does about me." Another silence. This one felt like a turning point. But before it could grow awkward, I gestured to Jean-Luc, who nodded and returned with the dessert wine. "To Dad's birthday," I said, raising my glass, "and to finally seeing each other, for who we really are." They raised their glasses too, hesitant but unable to refuse. As I sipped the wine, rich, complex, a little sharp, I thought about the years they hadn't seen me, all the times I'd been at their side, quiet, helpful, invisible, and how it took a single dinner for everything to flip. I didn't need to prove I was worthy anymore. I'd already built something lasting, but I wasn't done yet. This was only the midpoint. The evening had shifted, like a tide pulling away from the shore. The initial tension had settled, replaced by something quieter, a flicker of awareness on my family's part. They were still trying to comprehend what had happened, trying to wrap their minds around the idea that the daughter they had dismissed for years was now their equal in ways they couldn't ignore. And for once, I didn't feel the need to make them understand. It was strange, almost peaceful. The rest of the dinner unfolded with an awkward politeness, the air between us thick with unspoken questions. Diana sat back, her demeanor as stiff as her posture, and she kept fidgeting with her wine glass, her eyes flicking to me whenever she thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't just the pride I had taken from her, it was the realization that everything she thought she knew about success had just crumbled. I had spent my life feeling like I was invisible to them, the quiet one, the one they never truly understood. But now, I was here, in a room I owned, and no matter how much they shifted in their seats, they couldn't look away. Jean-Luc reappeared, guiding the staff through the final rounds of wine service, and as his footsteps echoed on the floor, I noticed how my family seemed to shrink further back. Every step he took, each word he spoke, reminded them of who I was in this space, and who they weren't. Dad was still trying to recalibrate, mentally counting figures, piecing together the financial success I'd silently built. The questions remained in his mind, even though he didn't ask. But I didn't need to provide the answers. The numbers would speak for themselves. "Jean-Luc," I said, as he approached with another bottle of Bordeaux. I needed something to break the silence, something that would snap us back to this present moment and not let us linger too long in the past. "Another round, Miss Walker?" he asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Yes, please," I replied, with a calmness that didn't betray my inner satisfaction. I was getting a little too comfortable in this power, I realized. He poured the wine and left us, his smooth, unbothered presence like a small but necessary reminder that I was still in control. The contrast between the silence I had forced and the quiet tension in my family's posture was like night and day. "Sarah," my mother said, her voice just a little too soft, "I still don't understand." I met her eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. "Understand what, Mom?" "This. All of this." She gestured vaguely, her hand hovering in the air like she was afraid of it landing somewhere wrong. "How did you do this? Why didn't you tell us?" I didn't let her voice crack, didn't let her guilt seep into my calm. "Because you never asked, Mom," I said simply. "You never cared to know." Diana's eyes shifted uneasily as she adjusted her chair, the discomfort seeping into her expression. "So, what now?" she asked, as if she were trying to make this all make sense. "Are you going to just rub it in our faces every time we dine out now?" I took a deliberate sip of my wine. "No, Diana," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I don't need to rub it in. You all do that on your own." She stiffened, a quick defensive smile flickering across her lips. "I'm just saying," she muttered. "We never had a chance to keep up with you." "Maybe you didn't," I replied, "but maybe I didn't need you to. I was never competing with you. I was competing with what I knew I could achieve." That stung her. I saw it, the flicker of realization that maybe, just maybe, she had always been playing a game with the wrong rules. She was busy focusing on keeping up with others while I had been focused on building something lasting, something that didn't need a comparison, something that stood on its own. "Sarah," Dad began, but he didn't finish. He couldn't find the right words. The waiter returned, and once again he and Jean-Luc exchanged a few words. The waiter bowed slightly as he set down the dessert. Chef Michel's special, a selection of petit fours paired with a signature port. I smiled faintly. "I look forward to it," I said. There was no response. My family wasn't in the mood for talking anymore. They were too busy trying to digest not just the food, but the weight of what had just happened. For once, they weren't looking at me with pity. They were looking at me as someone they had underestimated, and that was worth more than any apology. As I sat there staring at the beautifully arranged plate of desserts, a thought crossed my mind. I had done this. Not through flashy gestures or grandiose speeches. I had simply built. While they were busy enjoying their gilded lives, waiting for the next handout or the next event to help them climb higher, I was quietly, steadily carving out my own legacy. I noticed Dad looking around, his hand resting on the edge of his glass, the same glass he had been clutching through the night. He was trying to understand how he had missed all of this, how he had spent so many years casting me aside while I worked in silence, in the shadows of his big dreams and bigger disappointments. But the question wasn't for me. It was for him. "I've done everything on my own," I said, breaking the silence that had threatened to become uncomfortable. No handouts, no inheritance, no silver spoon, just me, building something real. That was the truth they had never asked for, but the one they desperately needed to hear. Jean-Luc reappeared at my side, and I could see from his demeanor that the evening was reaching its natural conclusion. The air had shifted completely. No one was thinking about my small apartment or my normal lifestyle anymore. No one was wondering how I managed. They had seen the results, and I wasn't done yet. I stood up slowly, making sure my actions weren't rushed, making sure they saw me standing tall. I raised my glass to them, to the table I once sat at without question, without power. "Here's to the future," I said, my voice steady. "To the things that matter." Diana's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in her I hadn't seen before: respect. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere at the table became a strange mixture of strained civility and quiet contemplation. My family, still reeling from the shock of learning the truth, now tried to navigate this unexpected shift in our dynamic. Their silence had given way to small, cautious comments, but none of them dared ask the questions that lingered beneath the surface. Not yet, at least. The desserts were cleared away, and the last of the wine was poured. The evening felt like it was winding down, yet there was a palpable tension in the air, one that spoke of unresolved truths, awkward realizations, and what I knew would soon be an inevitable confrontation. I had come into this dinner expecting the usual derision, the usual underestimation. But what I hadn't expected was how it would change everything between us. As my father lifted his glass for the final toast of the evening, his hand trembled slightly. He had always been so composed, so sure of himself in front of others. But tonight, that had all unraveled. I watched him carefully, wondering what he was thinking, what he might say. And I couldn't help but feel a small, cold satisfaction at how the roles had shifted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice hoarse but controlled, "I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate this special occasion: family, friends, success, the things that make life truly worthwhile." There was a pause as he glanced around the table, eyes flitting nervously, catching mine only for a brief moment before darting away. He cleared his throat and continued, his words becoming more tentative. "I also want to acknowledge the hard work that has gone into making this night so memorable. And of course to my daughters, for everything they do to support this family. Diana, my darling, I'm proud of you. And Sarah," he said, his voice faltering just slightly before he regained control, "we're proud of you too." The last part was an afterthought. It was clear he didn't know how to reconcile his feelings of pride with the sting of my success. The words felt hollow, forced, and I realized with a jolt that he wasn't just speaking to me. He was trying to convince himself that what he had always believed about me, about my place in the family, was still true. But I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked in tonight. I had spent my life fighting for acknowledgement. Now, I didn't need it from them. The quiet murmur of conversation resumed around the table, and I caught Diana's eye. She still looked pale, her posture rigid, as if she were bracing for something. She had finally begun to grasp what I had spent my years building, and I could see that the realization had rattled her. She was trying to salvage what was left of her image of success, but the cracks were visible now. My success had always been something she had taken for granted. But no more. I had put in the work. And now, I owned everything they had always aspired to have, without ever needing to flaunt it. "Sarah," Diana finally said, her voice sharp, "don't you think you're being a little excessive?" She tossed the words out like a well-practiced jab. "I mean, dinner is one thing, but this? Really?" I glanced at her, watching the defensiveness in her tone as she tried to reassert control over the situation. She wasn't used to being the one who had to explain herself, and for once I didn't feel the need to prove myself to her. I didn't need to. The truth had already been laid bare. "I'm not excessive, Diana," I said coolly, smiling as I met her gaze. "I'm simply being who I am." I let that sink in. The words hovered in the air between us, leaving a bitter taste. She wasn't ready for the truth, and she never would be, and I didn't care anymore. What mattered now was that I was in control. What mattered now was that I didn't need their validation. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said softly, standing from the table, "I have a business to run. You'll excuse me if I don't join in on the after-dinner speeches. I'm quite busy." I felt all eyes on me as I turned to leave, their gazes heavy, full of unspoken questions and unacknowledged truths. But none of that mattered anymore. I had built this empire on my own terms, without their approval, without their support, and now they would have to accept that. As I made my way out of the dining room, I could hear the murmur of voices following behind me, but I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. Jean-Luc, as always, greeted me with a polite nod, and I could sense the shift in his demeanor too. He had seen what had transpired at the table, and he didn't need to say a word. He simply followed me as I moved toward the back of the restaurant, past the kitchen, where the hum of activity continued as usual. Chef Michelle met me in the back, smiling warmly as always. She didn't need to say anything either. She knew. She knew exactly what had happened in the dining room, and she knew that my success wasn't just a reflection of my ability to run a business. It was a reflection of my resilience, my refusal to be diminished by anyone or anything. "I have a feeling the evening isn't over yet," I said to her, giving her a knowing look. She chuckled softly. "I'd say you've made your point." As we chatted about upcoming plans and new menu ideas, I felt a wave of calm settle over me. I was free, and for the first time, it felt right. My family's approval, their pity, their mocking, none of it mattered anymore. I had carved out a life for myself, one that no one could take away. Eventually, as the last of the evening's guests trickled out, I found myself standing in the restaurant's quiet entrance, looking out over the city lights. The hum of Lumars, once just a dream, was now a reality that I controlled. I didn't need their acknowledgement. I didn't need their approval. I had built everything with my own hands, and that was enough. In that moment, I understood something deeper. Success was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about proving it to yourself. And when you did that, when you reached the place where you could stand without needing anyone else to validate your worth, that was when you truly became unstoppable. And the best part? It wasn't over. This was just the beginning. As I walked out the door, I sent a quick text to my family. One final note to remind them that they had underestimated me. Next time you judge someone's worth, remember the person you're looking down on might actually own the ground you're standing on. And with that, I closed the door on a chapter that had never truly understood me. The future was mine. The next few days after the dinner felt oddly like I had stepped into a world that was no longer my own. My phone buzzed constantly, but it was no longer the kind of messages I was used to. There were no more texts from my family about dinner plans or vague invitations. Instead, I found myself fielding calls from business partners, investors, and colleagues I hadn't spoken to in a while. They had heard about the events of the previous night, and they wanted to talk about opportunities that had somehow become more accessible once my family had seen what I had built. It's strange how fast things can change, how a single moment, one quiet act of reclaiming your own power, can shift the way the world sees you. But it's even stranger when it comes from the people who've known you all your life. My family had always seen me as the lesser walker, the one who didn't belong in their glossy world of designer clothes, country clubs, and endless networking. They couldn't see past their assumptions to understand the woman I had become, the one who had built something from nothing. Now they were starting to realize the scope of what I'd achieved, and I could see the cracks in their perfect facade. I spent the following days locked away in my office, reviewing contracts, meeting with my team, and, most importantly, refining our upcoming expansion into new markets. London was just the beginning, and Tokyo was already taking shape. I was busy, and there was still so much to do, but my mind kept drifting back to that night, the moment my family realized just how wrong they had been about me. The power of silence was undeniable. They had assumed I was invisible, small, poor even. But when I refused to beg for their acknowledgement, when I allowed them to see me on my terms, the truth hit harder than anything I could have said. It had been a strange, quiet revenge, but a potent one. I hadn't stood in front of them, shouting about my success. I hadn't forced them to acknowledge me. Instead, I had allowed them to recognize me in their own time, on their own terms, and I knew that deep down, they would never see me the same way again. But despite the victory, despite the rush of power that came from seeing their faces when they learned the truth, something still gnawed at me. It was a familiar ache, the one I had felt for years, the quiet yearning for my parents' approval, for their respect, for them to finally see me, not as the girl who had failed to meet their expectations, but as someone who had surpassed them in every way. I wanted to talk to them, to ask them why it had taken so long. Why had they been so blind to what I was doing all those years? And why had it taken something as small as a dinner to make them finally see me? But that conversation never came. Because I realized something profound that day. My worth was no longer tied to their approval. I had spent too many years chasing after something I would never get. Not because they didn't love me, but because they didn't understand me. They couldn't. And that was okay. The weeks that followed the dinner were full of work. Meetings, calls, and site visits filled my days. The restaurant chain was expanding faster than I had anticipated. Jean-Luc, my ever-present ally in the field, was keeping everything running smoothly in Paris, and Chef Michel had taken over overseeing some of the new menus, adding creative touches that were starting to make a name for themselves across the continent. Even in New York, the Lumars flagship was attracting more customers than ever, and I was building something lasting, something that couldn't be destroyed by a single dismissive look or a judgment made from the outside. I kept my head down, focused on my work, until one morning when I received a message that changed everything. It was from my father. At first, I didn't want to read it. The thought of his words, carefully measured and filled with an undercurrent of condescension, made my stomach turn. But I opened it anyway, with an unexpected sense of quiet anticipation. "Sarah," the message began, "we've been thinking about our conversation. Your mother and I wanted to say that we're sorry. We've never truly understood what you've been doing all these years, but we see it now. We're proud of you." That was it. No grand apology, no explanations, just those simple words. And to my surprise, it was enough. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside me. I had spent so long waiting for this, for my family to see me, for them to understand. And now that it had come, I realized something. It didn't matter anymore. I had earned my success. I had built something incredible, and I didn't need their validation to know that I was worthy. I typed back a simple response. "Thank you. I appreciate it." And with that, I set the phone down, letting out a deep breath. The tension that had been building inside me for years seemed to dissipate in that moment. I no longer needed them to see me as worthy. I had already proven that to myself. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and calls. But as the evening approached, I found myself back at Lumars, sitting at the bar, quietly watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Jean-Luc was there, as always, running the show in the front of the house while Chef Michel worked his magic in the kitchen. There was a sense of calm in the air. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with everything. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. The empire I had built was thriving, my family had finally come to terms with who I was, and the world, or at least my world, was aligning just the way it was supposed to. I had finally accepted that the best revenge wasn't proving others wrong. It was proving to myself that I could stand on my own, without anyone's approval, but my own. And in the quiet of that restaurant, as the last of the evening's guests trickled out, I smiled. I had built this. I had made this all happen, and no one, not even my family, could take that away from me. The door opened, and I saw Jean-Luc standing there, his eyes twinkling as he motioned for me to join him. There was still work to be done, but for now, I had everything I needed. The rest would come on my terms. It's said that the best way to celebrate any victory is with those who've stood beside you, supported you through the rough patches. But for me, the real celebration wasn't the lavish parties or extravagant gestures. It wasn't about the apologies from my parents, nor the shifting dynamics that had left my family recalibrating their views of me. No, the true celebration was knowing that I had finally arrived at a place where I no longer needed them to see me, because I saw myself, clearly, confidently. But there was one last detail left to resolve, one final moment to leave a mark that would last longer than any fleeting apology or surface-level admiration. The following evening, I found myself standing in front of my office building, looking out at the lights of the city. The hum of the streets below was familiar now, a constant reminder of how far I had come and how much farther I was still willing to go. I had just wrapped up a call with the London team, and as I stepped out into the night, the weight of the day lifted with each step. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from Jean-Luc. "Dinner tonight? Your table is ready." The smile crept up before I could even stop it. My favorite place. Lumars. When I arrived, I found the restaurant quiet, save for a few patrons lingering over dessert. The staff greeted me with their usual warmth, though there was a newfound respect in their eyes. It was a small thing, but it meant more than I could express. It wasn't just about owning the restaurant anymore, it was about becoming someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not even my family. I took a seat at the bar, ordered my usual, and let the ambiance settle around me. The scent of aged Bordeaux mingled with the subtle hum of the evening's closing hours. A perfect moment of peace before the rush of tomorrow. That's when I saw him. Edward Sinclair, the man who had been a quiet but constant presence in my life ever since the wedding dinner. He approached with the same confident stride, his silver hair catching the light just enough to make him appear even more commanding. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he sat down beside me, his eyes studying me as if assessing some silent detail. "You've been busy," he finally said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. I glanced at him and raised an eyebrow. "You could say that." "I've been following your progress," he continued, his voice low but purposeful. "The expansion in London, Tokyo. You're everywhere now, Sarah." I took a sip from my glass and leaned back, letting the words settle. "It's been a lot of work." Edward's gaze never wavered. "You know, most people who try to build what you've built would be satisfied. But you've got more to offer. I can see it." There it was again. That subtle recognition. The same one I had felt when Jean-Luc had announced my name at the wedding dinner. The world, at least in this moment, finally recognizing me for who I truly was. "Not everyone is satisfied with the kind of success I've had," I said with a quiet smile. "Some people only see what they want to see." Edward took a moment before speaking again. "And you don't care about their approval?" "No," I replied simply. "I used to, but not anymore." He chuckled softly, nodding in understanding. "That's the key, isn't it? Once you stop waiting for validation, you start seeing the world for what it really is. And when that happens, you can create something that's not just about what people expect, it's about creating something for yourself." I didn't respond immediately, but his words lingered in the air. The truth of it was undeniable. I had spent so many years trying to fit into a mold I never asked for, fighting for recognition from the people who never truly understood me. Now I was building something on my own terms. It wasn't about them. It wasn't about anyone but me. Edward stood, placing his napkin on the bar and preparing to leave. "I've been thinking," he said, his eyes fixed on me. "You've built something remarkable, but there's more to come. I'd like you to consider joining me on a new venture. I'm launching a project to bring together entrepreneurs who don't just want to succeed, they want to change the way the game is played. Your vision, Sarah, it's exactly what we need." The offer was tempting. More power, more opportunity. But something inside me told me I had already made my mark. I didn't need to climb someone else's ladder. I had built my own. "I'll think about it," I said, though I already knew the answer. Edward smiled, almost as if he knew exactly what I was going to say. "Take your time. The offer stands." As he left, I watched him disappear into the night, his presence a reminder that the world was shifting. But for me, it had already shifted. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was no longer the one who had to prove herself. I had done it. As I sat there sipping my wine, I realized that the victory wasn't in the deals, the acquisitions, or the power I had gathered. It wasn't in the wine or the extravagant dinners or the wealth I had accumulated. It was in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had created something lasting, something meaningful. And it was in that moment that I realized the final chapter of this story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could build something that mattered, with or without the approval of the people who had never seen me for who I was. The evening came to a close, and I left the restaurant, my heart light, my mind at peace. I was walking away from something bigger than I had ever imagined. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I was doing it for me. If this story touched you, subscribe to Revenge with Seren, because some revenge needs no knives, no screaming, just one spotlight, one shining nameplate, and someone they once dismissed, rising, brilliant and unshaken. See you in the next story.